Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to my show, Reflect and Refresh with Zebunisa. My name is Zebunisa. I am a NHS worker, I'm a mother, and I like to raise awareness of important topics, and I like to speak with some inspirational people as well. Today we have Raf here today. He is an expert by experience lead for Signet. He is a mental health campaigner. He has worked with CQC and the Department of Health and Social Care. He has also helped develop some policy and guidance with NICE, the NHS, and the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So he's done a lot of work, and we have him here on the show today. If you could welcome him, please. Hi, Raf. Welcome to the show.
Hello, assalamu alaikum, Zebunisa.
Thank you for coming on. I appreciate your time. You have a lot of things that you do, so I wanted you on the show so we could just raise awareness of your work. So Jazakallah khair so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Obviously, I did say a little bit about yourself, but if you could just tell us a bit about yourself, a little bit of a snapshot about yourself, and then we can go from there, inshallah.
Thank you so much. So, as an expert by experience, maybe it's just good to have a little bit of a working definition. An expert by experience is someone who has used or cared for someone who's used health and or social care services. So, in my case, I've used lots of different mental health services in the past, and I work in them. So the idea is that an expert by experience brings unique lived experience perspectives to the table. We go in, we work alongside staff, we create a bit of a bridge between the current patients on the wards and the staff working on them, and also bring a different perspective on everything from training to patient safety to the general culture and the feel of the ward. But one of the primary functions of the role is really about capturing feedback from service users, from patients, and then using that to drive meaningful change within the services. And that's kind of come a long way. I was one of the first really at Signet. Um, and we've now got a large team of experts by experience nationally. The organization that I currently work for, we've got nearly 200 services around the United Kingdom, from the bottom of the South Coast all the way up to Dundee in Scotland. So it's a really unique opportunity to kind of see how the mental health landscape is within the UK, and of course how our communities kind of respond to mental health differently, and how regional factors can vary.
I know you've been in with the mental health organization Signet for over 10 years now. And when I met you, it was inspiring to hear your story. So you yourself have been a patient, because that's what expert by experience person is. They're a patient themselves, and then they're helping others who are patients at the current time. And I believe you said you were in a unit. Could you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I did an article a while back actually about my experiences as being a Muslim on a mental health unit, and there was an article that I'd done reflecting on the experience of me actually praying in my room, and the staff member actually thinking I was actually talking to myself, and that wasn't necessarily part of the symptomology at the time, and that just goes to show that kind of some people's experiences, depending on their faith or their religion or culture or background, can vary dependent on the cultural competencies and the cultural understandings that staff actually have within those services. So it was a very difficult period, and it was for a long time, but it also gave me the experiences, alhamdulillah, to be able to support others today.
Alhamdulillah. And how do you think that mental health is perceived in the Muslim community? What do you think about that? What do you think about the way it's raised in the media as well?
Well, I think it's getting better, but obviously there's a long way to go. I still think, back home and in our communities, we still look at mental health as this kind of Western import. We look at it with a lot of suspicion. We look at it as, in some cases, if it doesn't exist, or we can, have a real religious element to it. And of course, all of those things are important, but I think at the same time, if one had a broken leg, you wouldn't only do you would go to see the doctor. And I think we should do the same when it comes to mental health, just like we did in the early days of the golden age of Islam. And inshallah, that's something we can talk more a little bit about, because I think if we really go back to our roots and understand our contributions, we'd be a lot more open to discussing mental health as a community.
Definitely. I remember when I was ill a few years ago, the doctor said being unwell is like getting run over by a car and your brain's exploded. And that sort of analogy made me realize, wow, so he's trying to describe mental health like that. And like you said, that when you're unwell, like physically unwell, you go to the doctor. So equally, when you're mentally unwell, you should be going to the doctor as well. What do you think is stopping people getting this support?
Um, I think there is like a level of suspicion, and to be honest, it's not just with our community either as Lebanese. I think generally people can be quite suspicious of mental health. There's a lot of worry about medication, the side effects. There's a stigma around mental health generally, and I think specifically for our community, we have to understand that mental health isn't something that necessarily only impacts you know Western communities or Western civilizations, because that's what a lot of people have told me in our conversations. Oh, that's an American thing or that's a British thing. Actually, mental health can affect anybody. And that I think there's still a little bit of a journey for us to go on in raising awareness and understanding that to be able to signpost people properly. Because at the moment, people might be going to their mates or their dads or whoever it may be, and having this conversation and may not be getting the best advice or being signposted in the right way. We really need to get to a point where, as a community, we can support one another and signpost each other to get that medical support and go and have those conversations.
100%. I think it's all about speaking up when you're suffering. When you're unwell, like you have a flu or anything like that, you tend to go to the doctor straight away. But when you're mentally unwell, maybe there's some barriers there, lots of barriers, and you don't think that you need to go. But definitely, if you tackle something quickly, then it's better than delaying the process. 100%. I know you wanted to talk about Islam and how Islam approaches mental health and how it approaches well-being. When we spoke, you were talking about Islam in the Golden Age, and you were talking. You also educated me on the fact that there was a book or medical booklet that was done by a Muslim. So, if you just want to give us some information about that, I'm sure the listeners would love to hear that.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to speak about this on Islam channel before, and a lot of people reached out to me after saying they weren't aware of this point, and I think it's something that we really need to speak about more and celebrate. When you look at medicine more generally and even mental health, the golden age of Islam really had a lot of contributions to health and well-being. So you hear about people like Al-Razi, Ibn Sina. These were the early kind of concepts of medical trials, infection control, the importance of hygiene when conducting surgery. If you look at Ibn Sina and the canon of medicine, that medical booklet was used for hundreds and hundreds of years within the Western world afterwards. And also created like things like the principles of diagnosis. But I think a big contribution that Muslims made during this period was the separation of body and mind and understanding that the mind can have its own unique conditions and so on. And how that translated into care on the ground was very interesting because the very early mental health services or mental health inpatient units of their kind were connected to masjids, they were connected to the mosque. The community had a real sense of ownership. You would go on to what the equivalent was of a ward and you would smell lovely fragrances. You would have pet therapy, like, birds. You would be prescribed walks in the park or walks in the garden. And it's really interesting now because when you look at mental health these days, it seems like we've somehow gone backwards and we're trying to go back to that, even in the Western world. Because if you remember, we've only come from asylums and institutions recently, and some would say they still exist in varying forms. But a lot of what's happening these days in mental health services and mental health more generally is those conversations about social prescribing, about how going to a walk in the park for twice, 3 times a week can alleviate symptoms of depression significantly and act as a protective factor towards mental health. But also about, music therapy and pet therapy. This is stuff we were doing 1,000 years ago, basically. And we need to celebrate that. We need to understand that. We need to appreciate that. So through our understanding and celebration of our contributions to mental health, can we stop looking at it as this, this Western import or this very suspicious, non-religious thing? You know, mental health is something that can impact us all. It's something that we've contributed to massively as a society. And the West, far from creating this, have learnt from us within many respects and are even trying to implement it more these days.
I feel like only if you have gone through mental health yourself can you understand it. Obviously, others can understand it to an extent, but only when you go through it yourself. And I know like there's things that people say that Nazar or it must be Nazar, it must be black magic. Sometimes people are failing to accept that mental health sort of exists and like their person is suffering or going through that mental health issue. Did you have anything like that when you were going through your situation?
Yeah, it's almost like a norm. It can become like a normal part of discussions, right? Depending on who you speak to and how much of an understanding that they have. It can be very confusing, as you can imagine, you know, at the time. But of course, on reflection, you realize that actually it's about perhaps a lack of understanding, and people have their own experiences as well, right? So maybe people have experienced things in the past and might not have gotten the necessary medical support and have found comfort through prayer and through religion. And what's really interesting is that these things aren't antithetical to one another, right? What we're not saying here that medicine is the only answer. Actually, a lot of research, a lot of when you speak to people, and in my experience, religion plays a massive part in recovery as well. One's religion is part of their identity. People find comfort in religion. People find comfort in faith, and it's really important to understand that. We're not trying to detach the two, but in the same way, if we was to go back to the analogy that you were discussing, Zebunisa, you might do dua, but you might also go to see the doctor. There's no harm in doing both, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the heart of what we're trying to discuss here.
Would you say that I'm not really sure if it's promoted like in masjids and things about mental health and stuff, but would you say there definitely needs to be more awareness about it?
I think so. I think as religious leaders can do a lot more to maybe speak about mental health more, in the masjids. We've done a lot of work during the pandemic around misinformation that was happening with the vaccine. So we've done a lot of work with masjids around the country. For example, the first masjid in the UK in Woking, also around Bradford, um, mosques in London. And that had a massive impact because I actually was visiting a lot of our services. We found out that a lot of Muslim staff in particular were very skeptical of the vaccine at the time. And if you remember, there was a period where there was even a choice that some staff were going to have to make where if you didn't take the vaccine, you might not be able to work in the sector anymore. I think
Right.
that was later kind of reversed. But when we had kind of went out to speak to people, there was a lot of misinformation that, the vaccine had pork in it, that it had alcohol in it. I think the specific kinds that were being offered to people didn't have any of those things. And some people even took a religious view to the vaccines aside from the ingredient standpoint. And hearing from imams, hearing from senior figures within the community, people were able to be more equipped to make an informed decision. And look, this isn't about forcing people to take the vaccine, right? In the same way you wouldn't force someone to go to see the psychiatrist. But what's important is by having those discussions and raising awareness, people are more equipped to make informed decisions and informed choices for themselves. And I think that's what's really important. That's the real role on this agenda for religious leaders and imams and so on to just people really believe and hold on to what they say. So we need to use opportunities like that to help raise awareness about things so then people can make choices that are the most important for themselves.
I know that imams are trying to be more relatable. I saw something that went a bit viral on the internet where imams doing push-ups after Tarawih. I thought that was great. They're trying to be relatable out there. And then on the back of that, I was speaking to one of my colleagues. 'Cause I work for a few organizations. One of the organizations I work for is APP, which helps women who have gone through postpartum psychosis. And that was something that I had myself. And this colleague is working with the imam in Reading, so she's from Reading, and they're going to be making a booklet about postpartum psychosis and illnesses after birth. And yeah, so I said that I think when you're trying to include imams, you just have to work with them. You can't just leave it because they have so many things they're doing. They're doing a lot of things. They're preaching. They've got a busy timetable. You have to be proactive with the imam if you want something to happen. So things are happening, like you said. You're doing things with imams across the UK, and for instance, my colleague is doing stuff with her imam close by, and I think it's just about being proactive with them, because obviously they must have thousands of things they're doing, and sometimes they just need someone who is has their topic area and is helping them to do something. So they're going to be doing a fantastic project where they'll be making this booklet to raise awareness of people who are unwell. And all these sort of things are a step in the right direction, I believe, and I think it's really great, to be honest. And I think that's what we need to do more of, taking these initiatives and doing things like this, definitely.
Absolutely. I think I'd love to be able to relate to being able to do push-ups after Tarawih, but they must be having a lot of energy from iftar. But I think you're absolutely right, and this is what we need to do. And it's not only on the religious leaders, but like you said, what we can do as individuals as well to support that, right? So people like yourself, Zebunisa, who take their time and passion out to raise awareness. I think we need to come forward more as a community, particularly if we have that experience and understanding ourselves. I think the onus is on us to a degree as well, right? If we
Yeah,
do if we do have the ability to be able to articulate these things, we need to really be stepping up to the plate as well and supporting that. We should just all put it all on the imams. They're very helpful in the sense that people listen to them, but in terms of that deep understanding from a lived experience perspective, you know, people who have used services or people who work in them are also best placed to be able to give that advice and support.
100%. If you have a specialist, it's always good to have like a specialist or someone in that area supporting, for instance, their mom. If you want like, some change, if we want change in the Muslim community, then we need a specialist or whatever profession you're in, and their mom and someone who's just like got the itch to do something, and you can make some change.
Exactly.
Yeah. I know you've been with Signet for over 10 years. How have you seen the change in your role, in situations, uh, you know, in the whole patient field, transferring from a patient to a staff member? How have you found that all?
Come a long way. Come a long way. There was a lot of restrictions when I was in hospital. You weren't allowed to even have like a mobile phone. You used to have time limits on how long you could even use the phone box. You could only order a takeaway once a week. And there was only two halal options on the menu. So I was eating the same food every day for years. So I really used to look forward to takeaway day. But all of that's changed now. There's this thing called least restrictive practice, reducing restrictive practice that's taking place within mental health services. And the whole point of that is removing these draconian blanket rules and restrictions and rules that are very oppressive. And it's all about giving more autonomy and freedom to people. So these days people have a lot more freedom, a lot of the community might not actually be aware of the small things that we take for granted in life, can be stripped away from you when you go to a hospital, your choice of clothing, what you eat, where, when and where you sleep.
Even
Um,
fresh air. You don't have
exactly.
fresh air, yeah.
Absolutely. When you can even go into the garden, forget about going into the community, but there was a lot more restrictions even when you can go into the garden. Things have become a lot more flexible now. And there's that recognition that through that flexibility, people are able to recover faster. They're less traumatized from their experience of being in those services. And also, it reduces things like incidents that happen whilst in those services. So it's been refreshing to be part of that, Zabanisa, because I feel like people's experiences now, whilst there's still a lot of work to do, there's still a lot of improvements that need to take place, and it's important we acknowledge that. They've come a lot, they've come a long way, and it's a lot better from when I was in services. And I think that's something that we should
How
celebrate.
long ago was that when you were in services?
It was about 8 years ago now.
Yeah,
Spent 5 years in one go in services.
yeah,
Um, so obviously I was still using services when I'd come out for a few
yeah.
years. But in terms of actually being an inpatient, that was for 5 years in one go. So it was a long time.
A long
And you
time,
can
yeah.
imagine how like I missed out on a lot of things, kind of like education and stuff like that during that period. And even in the community, trying to
But I think
manage
you
mental
did
health.
manage to do a master's then in the end, didn't you? You did do a
Yes.
master's, yeah. When did you
Yes.
manage to do that?
So it was I kind of started the journey as when I'd come out of hospital. But I kind of I started in 2018, graduated in 2021, 2022. It was a bit weird about the graduation because the pandemic happened.
Yes,
So
yeah.
they didn't want us coming together with a pandemic. But yeah, alhamdulillah, I graduated. I was a master's at the University of Hertfordshire in mental health recovery and social
MashaAllah.
inclusion.
Yeah.
And again, that gave me a lot of knowledge about the connection. That's actually where I learned about the connection with Islam and mental health as well. Um, because I was trying to understand when I was studying all this stuff, where's the root of it? People talk about mental health, and this is so interesting, Zebunisa. A lot of psychiatrists don't even know about what we've discussed today. So a lot of these psychiatrists who have worked for 15, 20, 30 years within the sector aren't familiar that you know, of the contributions that Islam have given to mental health. I found that so interesting. So when actually learning about myself, it was a big shock for me because I feel that if me and my family had knew that when I was going through what I was going through, we, it would have been a little bit different. We wouldn't have maybe been so suspicious
Yeah.
about, maybe services and so on. So I think it is something we need to talk about a lot more.
I think sometimes people are suspicious of the services and then not wanting to accept help from them. Um, so then you are restraining from getting support because you just don't want the support from them. And I'd say that obviously the NHS, and when you're getting support and help, they're there to help you. They don't want. Why would they want to spend loads of money on someone? Do you know what I mean? Like to stay in a facility. Obviously, they want you to get better and they want you to get out and be independent. So don't think that they're against you. I know when I was initially ill for the first time, I thought everyone was against me. And I think when I'm speaking to a lot of patients, this is how they feel as well. Everyone feels trapped. And obviously, because you're indoors, the doors are all locked, you barely have any fresh air. And so then you do feel trapped. And it's very common for a lot of us to feel like that. I don't know about you. Were you feeling a bit trapped when you were in there as well?
Yes, definitely. And I think that the main part of being detained in a mental health act or being in a hospital environment is that restriction on freedom of movement. And only when you're in that situation, only when you've experienced that, do you really value your freedom in a different way, or can you experience your freedom in a different way? I mean, just imagine just wanting to be able to go out to the shop or being able to want to go out for a walk or fresh air for whatever reason and being told that you can't because there's not enough staff, or you can't because the psychiatrist said you can't, or that you have to wait 2 weeks for a meeting to take place before you're even considered to be able to do that. Those restrictions on really what are basic things that we do every day. You know, inshallah, later on, I'm just going to pop out to the shop, get prepared for iftar. These are things that you can't do as a patient, right?
You have to ask permission. So it's like that child parent sort of relationship, isn't it? Or
Exactly.
child teacher relationship.
And even worse, I would say in a lot of cases, because there's a lot of waiting involved sometimes. You have to wait for meetings to happen, ward round, CPAs, all sorts of different meetings with other people. And sometimes, you know, it's not about that one individual making the decision. In my case, um, a lot of people now, it's, the responsible clinician, so the psychiatrist can make a decision. But when I was in hospital, it really had to be an MDT decision. That would still be the case a lot of the time, even today. But there's a little
When,
bit more
sorry, when you say
flexibility in that.
MDT, that's multidisciplinary team. So all
Yes,
the different professionals in a room together making a decision on your care.
exactly. So that would be people like occupational therapists, psychologists, help me out, Zebunisa, if I forgot anyone
Yeah,
else. Nurses.
nurses. Yeah,
Oh yeah, the nurses would have a real go at us if I forgot about them. Yeah, so but it would be the entire team, and that is an opportunity really for people to kind of have a discussion about, what is best for you and how you can kind of move forward. But actually, from a patient's perspective, waiting for these meetings to take place. You know, it was very long-winded. It used to be once every 2 weeks when I was in hospital. Most of the time now, not everywhere, but most of the time is weekly. So it's a little bit better. And even outside of that weekly meeting, psychiatrists, so the responsible clinicians, are able to be a bit more flexible in terms of giving leave and so on. So there's more flexibility generally on that point these days. But still, the feeling is pretty rubbish, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like when you come out of it, you do develop some good skills. Patience is one of them. You do. I think it is a bit therapeutic. Like when I was there, I did feel like I did get some sort of therapeutic treatment, and it did make me feel a lot better. I developed myself a bit more. I think I gained more confidence as well. Would you say similar for yourself?
Yeah, look, we have ups and downs in
Yeah.
everywhere, right? So I feel like I had a lot of downs in hospital, but I had a lot of ups. You make really good friends. You have an opportunity to connect with your faith more. You have no excuses. You're not bogged down by the dunya. Yeah.
I was
No,
just gonna say that as well, because you're in that space.
yeah,
Like even when you think about prisoners, when they're in just a room and they're in for the most of the day, maybe 23 hours a day, then just in a small box room, they tend to just read all day, and then most of them even tend to go convert to Islam as well. So when
yeah,
you're in a mental health unit, obviously you can. You have your bedroom, then you have the living area, a kitchen. You have all these spaces, which is a lot more than a prisoner, but you have all these spaces and you can float around everywhere. You can speak to people like the patients, the staff. I felt like it was a big learning experience. And when I was ill, I was saying, oh, this is like doing research, because I'm like literally inside the wards and getting hands-on sort of intel, and I found it really useful. And now I use it now in my day job. But it was very good, and I feel like a lot of people would probably say the same thing, that you meet so many people who are going through similar journeys, different journeys, and you actually stay in touch. So I've stayed in touch with a lot of people, and it's nice, like when you have someone who is unwell and you've made friends with them, you both don't want anything from each other. You're just learning from one another. That's what I've noticed as well. So it's a nice learning journey, and you're trying to develop together with each other. And I've definitely made a lot of friends from the experience, even though it was a negative sort of experience, being unwell. I've kind of had a positive spin to it. I've made a lot of friends, a lot of connections. Do you feel like the same has happened with you?
100%.
Yeah.
There's been friends that have passed away, of course, as well. But there's also relationships that you've created for life. And that's those ups and downs we're talking about. But I think what it comes down to is how those experiences have shaped who we are. And we might not even be having this conversation now to
Yeah.
raise awareness for the community and to support others. I mean, even in your role and the work that you do, Zebunisa, how many people you support every time you go in and have a conversation and you use your expertise and experiences to support people. All of those things wouldn't have been made possible if we hadn't had our own experiences. So we have a saying, maktub, and I think that's something we need to recognize. And I think this is where that intersectionality happens between faith and between the medical realm, right? Where, you know, as people of faith, we can acknowledge and recognize that these things happen. We can pray, of course, we can speak to people about them. But at the same time, we have to work with the clinicians. We have to listen to medical advice, and we have to understand the root causes might not always necessarily be spiritual, but in the same way as if you had a physical health condition can be a medical condition. And I think that journey to get to understand all of those things took a long time for me. I'm not sure how long it took for you, but in the end, it's been really helpful in being able to share those with other people and help them along with their journeys.
Mashallah, yeah. I think in the beginning I didn't want to accept any help, but then later on I did start accepting help. And this was the same throughout all my admissions. I didn't want to accept help. And I feel like that's a lot of people that, you go through different stages of acceptance,
Yeah,
and there's a model, different stages of grief. And that's what you go through when you're mentally unwell. You go through different stages of grief or acceptance. And then finally, when you get through the end, you start accepting help. And when you accept help is when the help works, and then you start to finally feel better, and then eventually you're released. So it's just about communicating, accepting the help, and inshallah you can get better if you are feeling unwell. But it's about reaching out and communicating about it.
Exactly that.
I know when we spoke previously, you were talking about training staff, and when you go into these units, you because you've previously been a patient, you look at things with like 4 views, 5 views, and you showed us a video, and it was off a door, and you're saying the latch wasn't correct, so it's easily can be opened with a card or something. And you had all these different tips that you were going around places, taking videos, and then showing it to the right authorities and stuff. And I was just thinking, wow, that's really great, because you've literally been a patient, and now you're going to these places as like, let's say, a manager or whatever you want to call it. You can say a manager, and yeah, you're seeing all these different things that other people don't see. And then, like, you also said something like, which I found a bit funny, was, oh, you had those drugs in a unit or something, and then when you were investigating it, you realized that it coincided with takeaway night, so maybe the drugs were in the takeaway, and nobody else had figured that out, and it had been they were struggling to recognize that, and then you had come up with this suggestion. So yeah, it's quite humorous and funny, because you just think, sometimes you think, oh, other people will think the same thing as you, but obviously they don't, because they're doing their one hat, which is they're just being the doctor or they're just being the nurse. So they're not thinking about other hats, you know what I mean? But when you go somewhere, you're able to do that, and I found that really humorous, because obviously the takeaway, finding drugs in a takeaway, you wouldn't think that something like that would happen, really, would you?
Yeah, but of course, because I'd seen other people do that when I was a patient on the ward, when that issue came up of drugs coming onto the ward when I was in a working capacity, I was able to kind of relate that experience back to when I was a patient and what the other patients were doing on the ward, and bring a stop to that, because drugs have a massive impact on mental health, as you can imagine. But that's really the heart of this, isn't it, Zebunisa? Is our experiences. We look at things from a different perspective. You can study nursing, you can study psychiatry, you can be experienced for 20, 30 years, but unless if it's like us, who've actually been through the system, have been on the receiving end, that's a very unique experience, a qualification within itself. And it brings a level of different perspectives and understandings to the table, which are invaluable. And I think we need to work together with clinicians more, with organizations more, with services more, to really share that lived experience perspective, because it makes things safer, like you just discussed with those examples. But it also brings those cultural understandings better to the table as well, particularly in areas where that may not be the case. So, for instance, I've been in hospitals before where there's been lots of Muslim staff. There's a lovely multi-faith room. I used to pray together alongside staff and the patients together. In Ramadan, we'll all have iftar together. That's a really good example. But you might get sent to an area where you're the only Muslim person in the whole hospital. So there's no one to pray with, there's no one to have iftar with, and you might be so far away that your family can't even visit you either. So you're really alone. And it's about, how do we bring a level of consistency and awareness throughout those services. So interestingly, a lot of what we're talking about, Zebunisa, is not just about our community, but about mental health services more generally. There's still a lot of work on the cultural front that needs to be done.
I was just going to say that, so I work in mental health units, and what I've realized is patients particularly enjoy if you talk about cultural activities, if you talk about whatever they celebrate. So in my role, I try to, even though I might not celebrate Christmas, I'll try to discuss Christmas with them. Obviously, I celebrate Ramadan, so I'll discuss Ramadan. I might discuss Eid, and they really appreciate these conversations, because other than that, they don't really have these conversations. So sometimes it's just about using initiative and trying to find something that connects you to the other patient. Obviously, when you've been a patient previously, it's easier to connect with them. But if you're trying to connect with them and you're trying to tell them that, oh, how's your Christmas, how's your Eid, and having a discussion about Christmas or Eid, they really appreciate it. Recently, I went to a few wards. So this is me doing something that nobody else has told me to do. I went on the system and I checked the register, and I was checking where are all the Muslims. And then we have about 7 wards where I'm based, and only 2 wards have the Muslims. So I thought, you know what, I'll go to the 2 wards and I'll just sit there and start talking about Ramadan. We can have a bit of a group discussion. And that's what happened. I got to the ward, I sat there, and then within a few minutes, more and more people came to me, and we had like a group work or group discussion about Ramadan, maybe about half an hour on each ward. And then later, I got feedback through other people and through themselves as well. Oh, that was great, blah de blah. And I was like, that's really nice, you know. I think when you're like expert by experience like myself, or a peer support worker like myself, and you're using your initiative to do things, it kind of breaks the barrier, and then they want to communicate with you more. So I think this is something you definitely need to do. You know, like I said previously, when you want to build awareness through imams, you have to work alongside them. As a patient, as a peer support worker, who's previously been a patient, then you have to definitely use initiative and try to think about ways of how to work with them. So for me, working with a patient is getting to know them a bit more, and also raising awareness about things with them, having discussions, and talking about things that are important to them. So for them, a lot of them is about cultural awareness, about religion. So just having those conversations. And like when someone said to me, oh, what if you don't have the same view as the person? Then I said, then I'll happily tell them, like, I don't have the same view as you, but I'm listening to you. This is my view, this is your view, and that's okay to have different views, you know what I mean? So that's how I try to communicate with a patient. And I feel like it definitely works, you know, telling them about speaking about religion, speaking about the culture. And I think in the past, maybe there wasn't much awareness about this, but definitely now there's a lot of awareness. Do you kind of do the same thing? Like, do you talk about religion with patients or with staff members? Do you feel like it connects you with them?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like you know, a- I think we play a fundamental role in having brokerage conversations, I call them. You know, for example, the service user will go in to a ward round, so the meeting with all the psychiatrists and all those people that we were talking about, and say, for example, I don't want to take my medication during the day anymore because it's Ramadan, I want to fast. And I've seen that happen so many times in the past where patients can then become even more unwell because if they're suddenly changing their medication, sometimes you can change it to the evening after iftar, that's fine. But sometimes, depending on the medication, it can be quite difficult. And I'd actually have a word. Sometimes we'll get their mom involved and we'll have a conversation. And that helps people make informed decisions about themselves to keep people safe. It's really important to remember that, of course, if you're in hospital or you're taking medication that you need to take, then it's not obligatory for you to fast. And there's other ways that you can practice Ramadan.
I did
Um,
have this discussion with a patient recently, a few patients, and in the beginning of Ramadan, they all said they're gonna fast, and by like the 5th, 6th day, they decided they weren't gonna fast. And in when it was the first few days, I went to talk to them, and I did say to them, you know, because you're unwell, it's not obligatory to fast, and think about that. I said, obviously, I'm not gonna pressurize you to fast or not fast, but think about that. And the reason I had that conversation with them was because on the back of that, I had a meeting with my MDT team,
yeah,
and the MDT team were like, "Oh, we're worried about this patient, that patient, this patient, that patient," and they all are going to be fasting in Ramadan, and they don't know that it can be really bad for the mental health. And this one's just recovered, sort of, so I don't think it's advised for them. And then what I did was, on the back of that, I went to speak to them individually as a group, so I didn't appear like I was just talking to that person only. And then I told them that, you know, I'm on medication myself, and I have to be mindful about fasting or not, because if it's dangerous, then I might not be able to fast. And I have to consult with my doctors. Similarly, you're here in this unit, you need to think about the same thing. You need to think, can I fast or can I not fast? And obviously, you got a few days, see how it goes, because you want to fast. But if you can't fast, it's not the end of the world. And I said, in the end, like, you could pay fidya, which is when you can't fast, you have to feed person, one person each day during Ramadan. And so we discussed fidya because some of them didn't know what that was. And I said, also, we have a mum here, and I referred them to their mum. So this is what I say, working together with their mum, whether it's in a unit or outside a unit. And yeah, so then I referred them to their mum as well. and this really helped them. So sometimes when it comes to mental illness and medication, as a Muslim especially, there's so much pressure to fast, but it's about discussing your health with your doctor and taking the advice on board. If obviously if it's life threatening, then you shouldn't be fasting. But if you can fast, then inshallah fast. And it's just about having these conversations and accepting the fact that you can fast or you can't fast. And with these patients, obviously they were upset, but we had a few conversations and they realized that, yeah, it's just not feasible. They can't fast, but maybe next year. So it's like being hopeful, using your good language with them, strength spotting, trying to see the strengths of the conversation and trying to make them feel happy about the situation. Because obviously when you're inside a mental health unit, you can feel a bit down maybe as well, a lot more, because you don't have your normal support system with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, on that point, I would say that, when in doubt, just seek the medical advice, right? Because look, at the end of the day, from a common sense standpoint, if a doctor says to you, it's not a good idea for you to fast, then, it's probably not a good idea for you to fast. If you then went to ask your local imam and said, look, the doctors told me that I shouldn't fast because of this medical experience that I'm experiencing, whether that's mental health or physical health, of course, the imam's going to tell you, listen to the doctor, right? So, both Islamically and just common sense wise, and I think that medical advice is a good standing point. But of course, there is a gray area sometimes in how we support those discussions. But outside of that, I think that what you were alluding to before, Zebunisa, is about the importance of identity in those discussions. And when it comes to speaking about faith, speaking about lived experience, and speaking about personal experiences of mental health, there's a level of connectedness and identity that happens from those conversations when you're speaking to someone else. So a lot of those people that you'd spoken to, that you had mentioned earlier, I guess what's happening in that process and what I experience a lot of the time is it's helping bring people's identities back. And identity is something that is so important when it comes to mental health, when it comes to getting back to your own self, getting back to the community. So it's something that I think we just need to continue to do because it's so important. When you end up when you end up in hospital, sometimes you lose a sense of yourself. And anything that we can do to help conversations and help people find themselves again, that's something that we need to support.
I have a message here. It says, it says, Salams, Jazakallah khair to you both for using your lived experience to help others. And this is from Rahana Siddharth. Thank you so much for your message. I did get some on my phone as well. And thank you so much for listening as well. Yeah, that's really nice. And it's nice, isn't it, Raf, to hear that there's someone out there listening and also that they are giving us some good feedback as well.
Of course, and I really appreciate the conversation and being able to do that. And anyone who's interested, I'm sure they'll be signposted or can kind of um, learn a little bit more about peer support. Inshallah, we have some listeners maybe who have even been in similar situations to ourselves that might think, hey, I want to take a step and maybe get involved in the movement and try and help others and look at peer support, expert by experience opportunities, because I think that would be great.
If you want to reach out to Raf, it's Raf Hamiza. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
Hamiza. So Raf Hamiza, that's RAF, and the surname is HAMAIZIA. And my Instagram is mind_off_mum, mind of mum, MUM. I just wanted to quickly mention an event that is happening this weekend. It is an event at it's an event at Merman Centre in Leicester, Saturday 22nd at 5:30 p.m. onwards. They're inviting. They want to make it a multicultural event, and they want to have reverts there as well. And there'll be a 3-course meal. If you want to contact them, they are SNZ Events. You can find them on Instagram, and the number to call is 07466548989 or 0787890330. They are selling these tickets for £15 per person. So if you want to reach out to them, you can as well. We will leave some details with Ramadan Radio as well. Thank you so much, Raf, for coming on today. Was there any last things you wanted to say, like a Ramadan message? Just a quick one, because we do need to close the show.
Just thank you so much for having me, and for anyone who what does want to reach out to speak about lived experience, speak about anything that we've been discussing to today. I'm happy to do so, and inshallah everyone has blessed Ramadan.
Thank you so much for coming today, Raf. And I want to say Ramadan Mubarak from myself as well, from myself and my family. And Jazakallah khair so much for listening to the show today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Then.